So where do we start with this topic?
Nothing goes in, nothing goes out. This shit spreads like wildfire. This stuff took us to the edge. What the fuck, really? We just didn't know what was going off. And I knew at that point I was in trouble. This is Consumer Advice 101. It's never going to happen. I've kind of nicknamed him Dr. Death. As healthy as you like, and you flip one over and boom, the problem's there. It was fucking, doing the fish harder than it was the blanket weed. And I take this stuff that seriously. I cooled the whole lot there and then.
Welcome again, everyone, to another podcast session with myself, Chris Wall, and Ricky.
Now that they're on.
Also sort of dubbed as Ricky's Koi therapy sessions.
I don't know, this is going to start becoming a thing, innit, this?
Well, the thing is, you have got an addiction, and I think it needs addressing.
Fair enough, mate. I'm not going to argue.
So, life good, Koi good?
Yeah.
Football, don't go there.
Don't start, mate.
Yeah, fair enough.
Don't start.
So, we've been back. This is our third session back since the little break. First one was received quite well. We've had some nice feedback. It's good to do these sort of sessions. I think it gets a lot off of our chest, and in general, they seem to be quite well received. So
It must say, I'm happy with it now. I know I am, seriously. I think we've got it, all where I kind of wanted it to be. So happy days.
Yeah. So, I mean, this week we've been discussing like titles. It's quite important that we cover quite a range of topics within the industry. This week is a topic that is probably going to, touch a lot of people. Bacterial problems.
Ooh.
I don't know whether it's me not being as exposed to it, but it certainly seems like it's quite prevalent in the hobby these days.
Yeah, I think we are quite removed from it, aren't we? In a lot of ways, because we're not on that kind of ground level. I'm certainly not. And seeing more and more, and I know we've kind of touched upon this several times over the years now, but it's a fascinating subject. I'm going to go straight and say it again. I put it up there as being as bad as getting KHV in your pond, because they are that a full-blown bacterial problems, that multi-layered and complicated. And I think it seems to hit people. I think if you got KHV, it happens, you get the mortality, you either disinfect, there's just a clear process, and then you get that dealt with. Brutal, don't get me wrong. Bacteria is just not like that.
It's a really dragged on, or it can be.
Yeah, and you can make so many mistakes along the way. And I think the biggest problem, again, and I haven't seen too much change in any of this, is actually getting access to the help.
So this is where a lot of this conversation is going to be steered. Mm-hmm. It would certainly seem that a little bit of knowledge in this area is very dangerous. We've both had personal experiences dealing with clients and sort of just generally seeing it in forums, on social media, etc. So where do we start with this topic? It's a minefield, isn't it?
I think the biggest bit, and this is Consumer Advice 101 right now, is first, I think, understanding what a bacterial infection is, and then understanding the potential causes. It's possibly a good place to start before you get to treatment and diagnosis, because a bacterial problem, as you know, is not a few raised scales on a fish. And you can get damage that will, affect one fish maybe. One fish, for some reason, might have had a scale die. The scale's they've not been able to naturally dislodge it, and then got some inflammation around it. That's an easy treat. Or you might also get the odd physical damage where a fish has hit itself against something. But these are isolated cases. It's when the general population starts coming down with all the same symptoms is when you've got to start looking beyond. Then when you get to the real severe stuff and get ulceration, a few raised scales, as I've just described, is not ulceration. Ulceration breaks the skin, it exposes the flesh. It'll hit certain areas as well, like, opening up along lateral lines, mouths, base of pectoral fins, reddening in fins, the mouths, all these kind of areas. And it will start with one fish possibly, but there will be a percentage of the population suffering. When there is a percentage of the population, you've got to come to terms with it possibly is bacterial. And at that point, got to take some real specific steps. The biggest one being biosecurity lockdown. Nothing goes in, nothing goes out. That's the biggest thing there, because this is the first mistake so many people make. This shit spreads like wildfire. And that's including the fish that are healthy will be carrying this problem potentially. Because what you've got is a scenario, at the point of breakout, the bacteria levels in the water are probably elevated to a point whereby the immune system's just completely overwhelmed now and the fish are breaking out. And with every little stress event, which might not normally affect them, you're getting more and more breakout. So the fish being at that point, the minute you move them can be enough stress to then cause the breakout, or generally they might be actually carrying the problem and you just move it to another environment, and then the likelihood is those fish will have an outbreak and then also create that problem in the new environment that they go to. This is what you've got to be so careful of.
So we've been quite fortunate since we sort of conceived Koi Talk to come across various professionals that I would consider specialists in this area. No need to mention names at this point, but we've been taught quite a bit about the depths of
Absolutely
these kind of things. It has certainly, I'm first to admit if I don't know the answer to something, you ask the question. Certainly thought that I was quite well educated on the subject until someone comes along and opens your eyes. So at the point that you decipher that you've got a bacterial problem, let's just say, typical scenario, few fish, like you say, they're coming down with some problems, and then it starts to become a bit, it moves from one fish like a plague, from one fish to the next.
Yeah.
You've got a full-blown bacterial problem. Access to treatment, diagnosis, very difficult.
It is. I just want to intervene here because I know we've gone a bit off topic. I'll let you pull me back in a minute, but you say there we managed to learn a lot from professionals. We have. That's been great. But this is to hopefully make people realise, because I think there can be an element of shame in this when this happens as well. And I've known people from my days in my dad's shop. Actually, I remember now a customer came to mind who was a really regular customer. He only ever used to buy from us. He introduced a fish from elsewhere. We didn't know this at the time, but this guy just went quiet. Absolutely, we lost sight of him completely. And it weren't until several months later he reappeared. He'd introduced a fish from elsewhere and introduced a bacterial problem, which is another scenario that can play out. And the shame of it is what had kept him away. And that just blew my mind, because in them early days we could have helped. And so that's one thing. And hopefully by saying this, my experience, a lot of this is firsthand. From going years back to my early years in koi keeping, this is something I experienced several years on the bounce. We're going a long, long way back now, and all the problems I speak of were ones I experienced firsthand. I don't sit here today as any kind of perfect koi keeper who's never had a problem. The reason I have so much experience is because pretty much everything I ever speak of, I've dealt with. And trust me, from my days of this stuff took us to the edge. This is me and my dad at the time, because obviously, to be honest, it hit us both to the point where, what the fuck, really? We just didn't know what was going off and dealing with it. And this was all the mistakes we made. I still remember this pond to this day. It come all through summer. These fish we'd grown great, into winter, fantastic. Just coming out of spring, everything looked great. We netted them up to take some fish to the shop. I turned the first fish over and the pecks were shot underneath, ulceration on base at pet. And I knew at that point I was in trouble. Then as I start moving through, probably 30% of the population's got similar problems. And I was shocked. I don't know why, what had happened. But instantly, the first thing you think of, I've got several other clean ponds next door. Right, take the healthy ones out, move them, start treating the sick ones with antibiotic. And bearing in mind back then, which I'm sure we'll get to, antibiotic was very easy to get hold of.
Sure.
Move them. What happened? Within no time, then these were fresh, clean systems they got moved into with no other fish. The outbreak just continued. Anything those fish mix with also come down with a problem, That's why I say biosecurity lockdown is absolutely imperative. And generally, a broad spectrum treatment, as I'm sure we'll also get to, is also imperative. But let me also tell you one thing before you end up in a koi dealer's where full-blown bacterial problem, and you're being sold bottles of medication that are possibly going to cure this, it's never going to happen. I 100% promise you, you will not treat a bacterial problem outright with chloramine T, Virkon S, acroflavin, potassium. All will help as part of the solution, but they will not single-handedly cure this. It's going to be antibiotic. I'll let you bring me back to where we were there because I've completely forgotten.
Yeah,
I just hope that helps people. There is no shame around this. This shit happens. You've just got to deal with it.
I think it helps to understand that point, but it doesn't help to apply anything in terms of how do I get help? How do I rectify the problem? Now, for me, I think a lot of it starts with mitigation, at source.
Yep.
So, where you're sourcing your koi from, the standards that are upheld, even for yourself, where do you source the koi from in Japan? We've spoken about it behind the scenes many a time, wouldn't touch certain breeders.
Yep.
Again, no need to delve into that any deeper, but there's a deeper understanding behind all the choices that you make for the farm.
Yep.
In my opinion, that should be applied to a hobbyist as well. Perhaps sometimes chasing that, he does do good prices though.
Oh, yeah.
This is the reality though, isn't it?
That's the biggest first thing you've got to eliminate, because you can import a bacterial problem into the environment. So you've got to be savvy. And if you're buying fish from somewhere and you see any signs of it in any system anywhere, walk away, because you're putting everything at risk. Because if it's in one system, a lot of shops run centralized systems, not all, but it can happen. So that could be potentially in more ponds, and the scenarios I've just explained, where even though you see healthy fish or a fish you might pick might be healthy, but one in another tank that's running off the same filtration system isn't, it's a risk. So you've got to stop that. And that's, I have done that. You say that. There was one breeder, batch of fish came over one time, I remember it well. And as I opened the box, they all had very open noses and signs of bacteria around the mouths. And I take this stuff that seriously. I culled the whole lot there and then. 3 boxes of fish. There was no way I could risk letting that touch a single drop of the water in my facility. They didn't make it out of the bag. That was the end of them. That is how much I cannot stress how important it is to not let that be the bit that gets you for a start. Serious stuff. But yeah, you say about getting treatment. So where do people go? Because this is the issue. Have all koi dealers ever had the problem to know enough about it to get around it? Possibly not. That's not their fault. Again, this just comes down to experiences. I have experienced a lot of this firsthand from that brief period in my history, and then also over the years, as you will have done, dealing with clients. We learn a lot from that and their problems that ultimately they come to us to try and solve. But where do you turn? And I really can't shed... I say that we can shed some light, can't we? I mean, there are actually, as we've started looking, somebody reached out to us last year who was struggling with a fish, and I was worried it was a bigger problem. I think it potentially was. And after a bit of investigation, and I'll find this because I can't remember it now, there was a website that actually listed quite a few vets who dealt with fish and dealt with koi specifically. And she was fantastic. That was out in Manchester kind of way, I think, if I remember. And just recently, there's actually a case I've got involved in, somebody who reached out, and I was just, when I heard the backstory, I was like, no, this is not right. And unfortunately, in looking for help for a problem, this guy had actually turned to somebody who's gaining quite a bit of a reputation in the industry. He puts himself forward as a fish vet. I would call him more of a masquerist, to be honest. I've kind of nicknamed him Dr. Death because his reputation is starting to precede him. So here's another problem you reach out to. Who do you go to? So we found this list of qualified veterinarians. They're the only people who can legally issue antibiotic for a start, which you're likely going to need to solve the problem. And there's plenty of them actually out there, and there now is more of these specialist fish ones than I was actually aware of. And one down in London, I think, is it London Veterinary Aquatic Services or something, Bryony? She's who I've been working on this last case, been absolutely fantastic, I've got to say. And the sort of speaks in plain English, the kind of thought process was very similar, and my experience of dealing with it kind of aligned with the advice she was giving out. Absolutely great. The only issue in these scenarios is fees, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because, and I get it, her fees weren't crazy, but I can see how to a lot of people it would be off-putting. What you do have got to look at is obviously quantifying the cost of that collection and potentially losing that collection, which is where this could head, versus those fees. And there are different bits. It's not necessarily the full course, but you need somebody in this scenario. So, like I say, I'll remember in the description for people watching on the YouTube version of this, in the description, we will put the details in there of a couple of people you can reach out to, because I think the biggest thing is getting the diagnostic work first of all. So you've took the steps, you realise you've got to eliminate a few basic scenarios. So what could be causing this? Excessive waste in systems was one for years, especially in the days of multi-bays. You might remember some of this stuff.
Oh yeah.
There's a particular smell that unleft waste. You know, I had several clients who didn't actually know, which is when you're new to something, that's true, that you had to periodically open those ball valves and get all that shit out, and that was being left to fester for months. And that is, I mean, it's, yeah, when that's done, that the smell of that stuff, and that's what tips the scales in the end. So that can be a potential problem. Waste sat somewhere decaying, or parasitic troubles can be a trigger. But the biggest thing is often the environment, because in a nutshell, bacteria is a case of there's only ever one. It's all in your water. You've got good, the bad, the ugly. Everything's all in there at one point. The bad bacteria is very opportunistic. So they're always looking for an opportunity to strike. But what happens is generally the food source in there, whatever that be, the particles, fish mucus, you name it, that food source is only ever dominated by good or bad. One group becomes the dominant force over the food source, which suppresses the other. And when you've got everything working for good, it naturally suppresses bad. But what happens is if you let bad, you feed the bad better than you do the good, that'll overwhelm, and that's where your problem lies. So it's then a case of you've got to retip them scales. You've already got the bacterial problem that needs diagnostics. This is not just throwing antibiotic at it. My mate can get me some Bacterial. That's fair enough if that's what you need to do to get it because the veterinary services are out of reach financially, whatever it is, then great. Bacterial is a broad range antibiotic that in a lot of sensitivity testing does show up as a good choice, but it's not always the cure. Plus, I see so much wrong dosing of Bacterial as well, not getting the right course. Do you actually need injectables? Because again, if we're looking really, like I've just said, you need to be treating the whole group realistically. If you've got fish that are severely infected over others, they might also need injectable to target. But if you've got a collection of 30 fish, you really want to be lifting them up every 2 days, 3 days to net them, to inject them all, anaesthetize them, do it? Wow, is it? And then we're not only talking that, we're talking weighing the fish, because you need to weigh it to get the correct dosage. And people don't often do that. This case I refer to back up north, the dose, this fish was huge, and 90 odd cm, I think. When I found out how much Bacterial had been given, I nearly fell off my chair.
Like pissing in the wind.
Pissing in the wind, mate, big time. It's just a waste. And that fish, the stress on that fish having been going through all that and it not getting any better, or this is what it does when you get antibiotics, right? Either not the right antibiotic or not the right dose. You see it heal. It teases you almost, doesn't it? You see it heal. It's like Arsenal and title. You see him there. You see him there at top. You're having it back, mate. You see him there at top of the table, and then they fuck it all up.
We are sniffing this bit. Ouch. Get really personal, these podcasts.
So, and that's what happens. You see the wound heal, and then it outbreaks again. Yeah, and there's another scenario in that happens, and this is why I say about biosecurity lockdown. What can happen is all of a sudden you get the bacteria levels coming down, and you introduce a new fish because you think, oh, these are just healing now, everything's thing. You put a new fish in, and you've actually still got really high elevated levels of bad bacteria in your water.
Opportunity,
That there is just, it's absolute prime fillet steak. In fact, it's a full beef Wellington worth. and it's just going to kick everything off again, because that becomes a great new food source for this bacteria, bangs all the levels up, adds a load of stress into the environment, and before you know it, you've undone all your hard work. So complicated stuff. But sorry, coming back to it, diagnosis is needed, because you need to try and pinpoint, is it the water? So you can have the water screened. Is it actually gone as far as into the blood of the fish? And what is the bacteria? And then what is the most sensitive antibiotic that's actually going to do the job? And then when you understand all that, you also then need one of these individuals, veterinaries, qualified veterinaries who've got all the letters after the name, to give you the script for the antibiotic, which they can do, and they can actually then give you the antibiotic for you to do it. And you can learn to do that, because it might just be oral based, it might be injectable. It's quite an easy thing to do and not something people should be afraid of. And that also then saves you the cost of that vet having to come out all the time to do that. But legally, in order for them to do that, they've had to have visited at least once, from what I'm aware. And then the pond is to be deemed under their supervision in order for you to carry out that treatment course.
So let's just break it down. You know, we're pretty candid, pretty frank with people in here. Let's just say that the vast majority of hobbyists can't really validate or justify associated costs with a vet.
Yep.
We don't want to stigma anyone. You know, obviously it's a reality, isn't it? They've all got issues going on.
Yep.
So you turn to someone, a specialist.
Yep.
Without the letters behind their name. I've done it, really. I've helped people out in the past.
Yeah.
I've gone into areas where it's beyond any assistance, and I like to think in a lot of scenarios I've suppressed the problem. But there are people out there that are selling magic wands.
Yeah. Here we go. Can you hear me piss boiling?
I can feel the heat radiating from your face. Yeah.
So there's a difference here, right? Because there's a lot of exceptional koi dealers in this world who will try their hardest to help. Yeah, and who can plug the gap between a vet. Some might even have working relationships with vets. What you can't do are these so-called health professionals who put themselves out there as health professionals. And yes, they can do all the basic stuff. Don't get me wrong. Your scrapes, recommending a medication, everything like that. The minute they sell you or issue you any antibiotic, they're breaking the law. So don't be conned by these people, because you're going to end up overpaying for something that's basically illegal. Probably not going to get you the end results, because trust me, not a lot of these people do actually know what they're doing when it comes to this stuff. I know a little bit about antibiotics, ones over the years that have had sensitivity, good sensitivity bits like that. We know Bacterial's pretty broad range, all the rest. But it weren't until this kind of recent conversation with Bryony that you realise, yeah, I'm just scratching the surface on some of the technicalities of using antibiotics and things like that. So just be careful. And what you'll also find is these so-called fish health professionals generally won't have insurance either. And I know that from first-hand experience, because years ago I looked to get insured, and the first thing they asked me was for my paperwork to kind of prove my qualifications. And, you know, insurers weren't prepared to touch it, because they were speaking of getting indemnity insurance, which is what professional services, people in professional services have. So, yeah, just all this for me, it's not worth it. But in the case of kind of Dr. Death, all I've been seeing from that and the reputation that's preceding him is making things 10 times worse. It seems as if he's creating more problems so he can sell more overpriced medication, black market antibiotics, and never actually curing a problem. In the very case I'm working on, have been working on, I don't know how that particular guy is still in the hobby, because the money that he's handed over to still not have the problem fixed is remarkable. Strangely enough, I've been involved for, as of today, probably a couple of months now, and with Bryony's assistance. But over that period, within a 3-4 week time period, I had them things looking a hell of a lot better than they had been in the nearly 2 years he'd been fighting this on and off. It's crazy.
Wow, 2 years. I mean, that is the thing with bacterial problems. They don't go away quickly, do they?
No.
If the wrong course of treatment is undergone.
It's that's just that analogy again of Arsenal and the tile, you know, kinda, but not quite every time. And that's how you end up getting 2 years or 20 odd, is it, out of it?
Yeah, when it moves into decades, you just kind of, yeah, we've had some good times, you know. But you can't really blame hobbyists though. You're in a desperation point, aren't you? I mean, let's face it, bacterial problem, the speed in the onslaught of some of these uh, bacteria that just spread like it
Yeah.
is literally. I've been in touch and seen myself within a 48-hour period.
Mm.
That's how rapid we're talking.
Yeah.
Um, so finding legitimate avenues, I'm not being funny, like even if you could source a vet, you ain't getting them out in 24 hours, 48 hours.
No, and also, so yeah, that's a good point. So the diagnostics work can take time as well.
Yeah.
In this particular case, it took around a week, probably 7 working days to actually get all the results back. Varying points. You have actually reminded me there, obviously, the element of water playing a part in this.
Yeah, I was going to come on to that.
Fair
Yeah,
enough,
yeah.
because the whole metals thing is a whole different
Yeah.
scenario. But there are some things you can start doing, and this actually probably opens up another thing here altogether. Preventative dosing. I don't know if that's on your list of things to fire
It is,
in.
yeah,
But,
yeah, go for it.
oh, God, here's one that just drives me bonkers. In a healthy environment, you don't need to preventative dose for anything. You need to leave it the fuck alone. There's some more consumer advice. You just need to keep doing what you're doing and keep that environment in a positive state. There's no wonder products or anything you need for doing that. There are a few things you can use, but not essential in doing it, because as I described earlier, we've got the tipping scales here. Good, bad, the food source is in the middle. When good's up here, bad's down here, we're happy days. And when you're in that state, the problem you've got with preventative dosing, we're probably looking at 3 chemicals here I've known used. Chloramine T, don't like the stuff at the best of times. It's a massive leveler of bacteria, full stop. It does do that, but as I come on to, you've got problems there. Potassium, different reasons with potassium, and it is a different product. It will level out bacteria. It does a lot of good in reducing organics at the same time, though. So I'm going to set that one aside because elements of this apply, but not all of it. And then Virkon, which again, Virkon is a great disinfection product. And actually, in the scenario of having a bacterial problem, when you've actually got to the bottom of, right, I'm dealing with a bacterial issue now, Virkon is great for disinfecting the water. I'll pick Virkon over chloramine T every day of the week. I don't know why it is. This was advice given to me, and it seems to be the case. I don't know if it's less harsh or more selective of the bacteria it targets somehow, but chloramine T is just a leveler. And in this tipping scale scenario I've given you, what you do is you flatten both groups of bacteria, good and bad. And then what happens is one group is going to start rebuilding.
Quicker than the other.
Yeah. And as I've already said, the bad is opportunistic. So there's a chance, I'm not saying this will happen, but there's a chance that from leveling out both groups through preventative dosing, that the bad can then actually somehow take control, because it just gets an opportunity and bang, that starts dominating the food source, and then it's game over. You've got a problem on your hands, or a potential problem. That could be that the levels of bad bacteria then elevating in the water, just waiting for that batch of flukes that's left a bit too long, causes a bit too much stress, breaks a bit of the slime coat, gives an in for bacteria, and boom, it's party time. That's why I don't like preventative dosing of any of them products. When the environment is right, good's overwhelming bad, keep it that way. There's some useful water additives you can use, bacteria based, more kind of probiotic is what we're looking at. And other than cleaning bacterias, PSB bacteria from Colombo is a product I've rated for years. It's photosynthetic, it's basically a cleaning bacteria. And it's really good for putting good in there, and it's a product you notice a difference when it goes in the water. Always have done. It's the reason I like it, because I'm not a big fan of these water-based additives. I think a lot of them are just a pile of shit. This stuff, much with Saki Akari, I've noticed people see a difference and are therefore happy to keep buying it because they do notice a difference. So something like that you can use. It's the only one I've ever used and seen anything come from. But again, it's not essential. The big thing to do is don't do preventative dosing of the likes of chloramine T and Virkon. But like I've said, when it actually comes to identifying you've got a problem, the initial stages of disinfection, which you've got to do, you've got to disinfect the water, bring that bacteria count down, and then start treating the fish generally through antibiotics. And Virkon is a very good product for that. So like you've just said, you're in them early phases, what should I do? That would probably be my go-to. Because for me, I've seen it work an absolute treat. In this case that I've been working on, because we had that time lag between me getting involved, getting the vet on site, and then getting the lab work back. That's where I started. I actually started with potassium in this scenario, because just looking at what was going on in the environment, there was actually flukes. Here's an interesting part. You'll be aware of this. A lot of parasitic stuff in cases like this actually being the secondary problem. It's mind-blowing, isn't it? And I didn't actually see it as that, because I've always known it this way. But when I mentioned to this guy, it took the best part of a week for it to kind of sink in that these low levels of flukes that kept cropping up and a little bit of Costia were not the primary issue. They were secondary to the bacteria and the stress of the environment and the bacteria that's actually going on. So, fluke medication was being pummeled at them constantly because the flukes will just keep coming back. The Costia will keep coming back. Because again, it's not the primary issue, it's secondary. So I thought, right, let's go with potassium first, because I need to clean the environment up big time. And PP is obviously an aggressive oxidizer. Got to get the dose right. And because it was under my supervision and with some very clear instruction, it was a bit of a lively dose, to be fair, and repetitive. But my God, the difference after 3 days of this was just insane. I remember the guy saying to me, my pond's not looked like this for 2 years, So I started with that, leveled that out, and then gave it a period of recovery where it did actually take, I know on the main pond it was treating, about 4 days for water to kind of rectify itself. And then again, looked to, I think we got the vet in at that point. So it weren't really, the lab work that came back on the water was never going to be a fair analysis, because you've just had nuclear grade potassium in there. But followed on then in the interim gap between that and the lab work coming back with Virkon. And again, dosage, I'm not going to get into dosages and stuff like that, but the course I've used, and I've tested this out a few times now, was actually repetitive dosing, day after day. Because the thing, in my opinion, this is like with fluke treatments, we don't know, you can't visually see it in the water. So we don't know the rate at which that medication has kind of been metabolized by the system. All that bacteria, organic, everything going on in there is breaking everything down that hits the body of water. So because there's no visual aid, we don't know. And you can't just rely, you could do it the one day, it might have been gone in a few hours, depending on how the pond's performing, and it's not really going to have done anything. So do we ever get the concentration in the water high enough, for one? And then it's a case of, we've got to bridge this gap. So if we'd have done it the once, kind of leveled things out a little bit, if we knew we'd got the dosing spot on, which we don't, what would have happened then over the ensuing 3-4 days? You might have just had that redevelopment again and the bad just spiking. So my process was, right, up until this point, we're going to level this. So we had like 5 doses on the bounce daily. I think one day I stopped because I noticed the water foaming quite a bit. And that's when you're getting a decent build-up of Virkon in there. So just that 1 day break, and then went back for another 3 after that. But my God, even as this is all before the antibiotics started, and it put that pond and them fish in a place they've not been in for years.
So, because I've got quite a curious mind when it comes to the biology and science behind it all, quite nerdy like that. And you were saying, like, I spoke to Bryony previously with other bits, but I wasn't there when you went to see this client. Obviously, water is a prime incubator for pathogens, isn't it? You've got a closed environment where you've got multiple hosts for everything. All the factors, stress factor comes along, contributes, triggers that first fish that breaks down.
Yep.
And it moves from fish to fish. That's your classic scenario. Once it gets blood-bound, it becomes very specific and acute to treat. That's when we're probably at the point of injectables.
It is serious, yeah.
But you were mentioning about the water-bound bacteria and controlling that, and that being a massive part of mitigating and or suppressing a problem once it starts to rear its head. It's difficult to quantify a lot of these problems until you can visibly see them. I think that's a big point. We always mention about just viewing your fish, being familiar with their patterns of behaviour. They are creatures of that reoccurring behaviour, looking for food, activity, the swimming patterns, everything like that. How do you know when you're on the cusp of this? It's a bit of a loaded question, but when you're saying when you're at that balanced state, how do you know when you're at that balanced state or whether you're on the cusp of a tipping point?
That's a good one. I think that because this can be
genuine question.
this can be the tricky thing with bacteria, because depending on its origins. I mean, generally we can see, can't we, when a pond's happy, healthy, your fish's energy levels, the water might have that bit of a shine, that kind of energized look to it, as opposed from that kind of stale looking. That's probably the only way I can visually describe that, and the fish's behavior. But yeah, sometimes with bacteria, the fish will swim around looking absolutely as healthy as you like, and then you flip one over, like that scenario I described, and boom, the problem's there. So that's where I think windows have played a big part in these days, because that gives you that, side and bottom view that you wouldn't used to have. I didn't have in that scenario. And then because it is harder when you're inexperienced to spot them little bits. You might see, literally physical signs, like the way a fish holds its mouth might change if there's some kind of infection there, because for whatever reason, it might keep the mouth extended. Or in this case, again, the pond I went to, I looked straight away, and then, again, I saw fish, the mouth not right. There was one isolating at the bottom, which is one of the telltale signs. But straight away, a fish swimming around with its peck held in.
Yeah.
But held in where it looked paralysed. It just couldn't move it out. That I knew had infection. Without even looking, it had infection on the pec fin muscle on the underside.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it did. So it's more physical changes in behaviour like that, where something might be getting them, you'll be looking at. But as the actual environment, you won't know. And you can't just be testing the water all the time like that. But it's just looking for them physical signs of changes. From experience, I think you'd probably agree, you can kind of tell when you've got experience how that water is. The smell of it might change, for example. There's a few little indicators there, but generally, when that happy, healthy environment is the winning one, you won't have any signs of any infections or fish problems.
I've got a few theories myself, just based around experience, exposure to different environments. In Japan, certainly the farms vast majority of them, reputable farms, certainly the farms that we deal with, you don't really see these problems, do you?
No.
So here's the kicker. They come over to the UK. We've said that it seems to be quite a prevalent problem in general. Read a lot of papers, spoke to marine biologists. Immunosuppression is a big topic of conversation. The environment suppressing the fish's immune system, again, making it slightly more likely that in the event of a stress event, something occurs. The other thing is obviously the source of the fish. Multiple shops coming from hobbyist ponds.
Oh, there's one.
Yeah, that is one. And we've already spoken about breeders, preferable breeders. How do you educate people as to some of them are quite obvious points, but unfortunately, a lot of people are going to have to find out the hard way. It's not as if we could do like these are red flag areas to avoid, for multiple reasons. You got to find out your own the hard way.
I disagree, because I think we can. Pay attention to what we're saying. That's literally where we're at right now. Biosecurity, big thing. Learn the basics. Again, if you're in a shop, I'll reiterate it. You see signs of bacterial infection in a fish. You've obviously got to learn to become aware of this, You know, it's important. But just the little things. Again, I've done this for years. You know, you make a new fish purchase, you get the fish in the bag, ask to have a look at it through the bag, just so you see that angle.
Basics,
Hold
yeah.
the bag up, have a look at the undersides, anything. You know, there's a difference between it might have not dislodged a scale or something like that. I'm talking if you see open signs of rawness, a piece missing out the fin and red rawness there, or around the mouth or anywhere else on the body, just honestly walk away. It's not worth it. No fish is that precious that you want to be introducing anything like that into your pond from a dealer. So yeah, biosecurity awareness, super, super important. So don't be importing a problem. And yeah, there we go, really.
I think a lot of hobbyists enter into like a buy-in circle or scenario. And for me, from what I hear and see on the periphery, you know, I don't get too involved in the politics of it all, but you can't help but see it a lot of the time or have it forced upon you. A little bit of information is dangerous in this game, particularly when you're dealing with problems like this. Scenario A, Johnny Blogs is treated with a treatment, it fixes his problem. Next door neighbour or friend gets a problem. You want to do this. And before you know it, even if that were by chance, it becomes gospel. Now, in this industry, I think that innovation and change, it's just people don't like it. It's like the you know, the FA, Football Association. It's the old boys club. We've done it this way for this amount of time, so this is how it's done. And the moment you try and go against that grain, classic example when we were speaking to a prominent marine biologist about the KHV quarantine protocol, all the data and science that he had specifically researched for the last 5 years, a lot of it went against what everyone is told is how it should be done.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of people.
So do you stick your head out? Or, I think, personally, morally, I say a lot of things that I do it in maybe a little bit of a calmer fashion, but I'm a big advocate of keeping it simple. You know, there isn't an answer in a bottle for every problem you've got in a koi pond.
That's the problem. I think what you rub up against when you look in certain areas, these groups say, and I think these groups are obviously now living online in Facebook, whatever you call it, there comes this thing to a point where kind of egos take over. And I've had this a few times, even in comments, where I've just kind of snapped back at people and it's sort of gone, can you not take criticism? Yeah, I can, and I'm the first person, as you know as well, and we're both the same. We want to learn, but it's who are you actually learning from? What's the credibility behind it? And when you're getting information from, I don't know, Koi Keeper, one of my favourite sayings, I experienced this so many times as a kid. Yeah. I've been keeping koi for 30 years. Well, what have you fucking done in them 30 years? Because if you've had a plain sailing journey and everything has been glorious, you've got no experience. It's plain and simple. You've just been lucky.
I had a scenario in the shop a few years ago when one of the young lads, he was getting real wound up by this guy. Same scenario. I've been keeping fish 25 years. And he just went, my granddad's been keeping koi 40 years and he's shit at it.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that. Class.
So you've got to be careful because, and you're right, there's so many layers of complexity to all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's difficult, and like I say, you can end up in a case where someone's hammering something home just because they don't want to be told that what they've done could be wrong in all these scenarios. You can't be a place where egos live, and like I say, I'm quite happy when you're around the likes of Bryony and people like that. This is their field. Fill my head with all the information, as much as possible. And these are the people we do need to turn to. And I hopefully, as people get aware, it's just finding the right way of making it kind of work within your budget. But I think there's a mindset thing there as well. There is one easy solution to a bacterial problem, but it is brutal. Mass, anaesthetician. Get rid of the lot. Start again. In some cases, and as harsh as this is, and that's actually language, as she was working on this case with me, There was certain fit where we've gone, there might be instances where putting the fish to sleep is the best solution here in this because it's too far gone. That's a reality of this as well. And in some cases, if you just started building a collection of fish up and you've been hit with this problem, so unfortunately, it might just be a very harsh reality that getting rid of all those fish is actually the best solution. That's going to depend morally where that sits. That it's tough, but we see this in farming and agriculture and stuff as well. Sometimes the only real solution is to cull. I
mean, we see it. We can't get away from the fact that we are dealing with livestock. I remember a farmer customer of mine years ago. He always used to say, "Livestock, dead stock." And it's that. From a farmer's point of view, that's probably a common sort of phrase. But when I actually started thinking about it, he got caught out with the TB from badgers.
Okay.
I think it was.
Yeah.
It's just a naturally occurring. Okay, there's things that. So the argument was cull the badgers. It stops the transfer sort of thing.
Yep.
But then you're impacting on another to
Yeah,
gain
yeah.
a positive impact for what you want to acquire. So yeah, some scenarios you are just beyond the point of no return.
Yeah, I mean, these are all the things you've got to stack up realistically, and this is where obviously when there's the emotional aspect of pets in it, it completely shifts it, and I fully understand that. Me commercially, and actually one kind of last thing I can share on this is there was a client a couple of years ago now got an issue in their shop, and at this point you're making commercial decisions realistically on what's going off, and this is multi-layered because if this happens and you've got a retail outlet that's selling fish every day, this potentially multiplying this problem out on scales you can't even begin to comprehend. And then you've got other things to consider: reputational damage, let's say this biosecurity risk of spreading it. And for me, having seen it, my advice straight away on this, and it caused a big conflict between me and this customer. Don't know where it stemmed from, by the way. That was ever to be found out, really. I think there was a deeper problem here in water. Again, it's kind of reared its head with the kind of metals scenario or systems, whatever it was. But yeah, and it'll just, it could even be parasites being left unchecked. I don't know. But my advice when I eventually found out there was a problem was kill the lot. And that just sounds brutal, but these fish were infected to the point where their commercial value was gone because they needed antibiotics. We're talking wounds that will heal, but then will scar. So know that, but it was the biosecurity aspects of this for me.
The risk of passing
it's
on
like spreading this on. In my scenario, if that came onto the farm in a particular pond, I would take no chances. Those fish would be culled instantly. I would not risk anything whatsoever if it got to the point where it was a true outbreak, and it's just not even worth thinking about.
You touched upon heavy metals there, and again, during my sort of reading, speaking to professionals, I speak to a fair amount of marine biologists. Obviously, dipped my toe in the reef side of things previously, so I've sort of got an understanding of the chemistry of water. But we know that a lot of people keep koi, or seemingly successfully keep koi, by flooding their ponds with tap water. Now we're moving off topic a little bit, but there is so many aspects of this that can have little impacts that combine and have a big effect.
Yep.
Now, one of the big things about heavy metals is who tests for them.
Well, actually, funnily enough, Bryony.
Sorry, from a hobbyist
perspective.
Oh,
sorry. Yeah. No, well, we can't, can we?
Precisely.
There are, I believe the Hanna bench meters can do these tests, but as far as I'm aware, they don't go down to the levels, possibly. I think it's parts per billion is the general reading we're using.
So these safe levels are very low.
They are.
At the best
incredibly
of times.
Low.
And we don't know the accumulative effect of multiple heavy metals, let alone one.
I do feel like this is a separate topic to go back to again at some
Yeah,
point. I know we've
absolutely, yeah.
spoken about it, but correct. And there's a load of so there's a lab in Germany, and this needs to be done at laboratory level.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah, yeah.
accepting there's any other way of doing this.
Yeah.
Because I've also know that the equipment has to be really well
Calibrated,
maintained
yeah.
to get accurate results from it. So laboratory level, there's a few I've been pointing people to, which was a home test, but I do now know that Bryony offers it as a service as well, and there's probably other fish vets that will have access to it because as a part of the diagnosis, it's something we have to rule out, especially where you've got a persistent bacterial problem that doesn't seem to clear up or clears up and comes back, and you've ruled a lot of other things out as well. Because the presence of heavy metals is just a brutal one. It's something there constantly
Stress factor, isn't it?
suppressing that immune system and stressing.
Yeah.
And the real interesting thing on that is that, like you say, we've got fish safe levels that were developed by Anne Telford all these years ago, which was amazing research and so on, foresight from her. But it was very clear in her, whenever she used these readings, was that these are based on the presence of this one metal alone. The minute one or more is there present, we don't truly know the fish safe value. They'll adapt. And the very interesting thing I've seen in 3 or 4 of these tests from across the country I've had done at one lab, that the iron is already at the maximum fish safe value in all of these reports. Come back, fascinated me to see it, which then means the very presence of any other metal
Is exacerbated.
at any level, we don't know exactly what impact
It's not going to have a positive impact, is it?
No, not whatsoever.
Sure, yeah.
Not whatsoever. Which does open a whole new kind of worms up. But again, I can share one more experience from years ago. And again, it was experience that helped me diagnose this, but that's when my journey with heavy metals started, was because it was a guy locally actually in Worksop came to me, and not long after introducing his first fish from me, did problems start. Now, I've said that in that particular way because this is how this shit plays out. He'd also introduced fish from a couple of other places at the same time, which I found out later. But then all of a sudden, in saying that, I remember that the problem was just starting, but I wasn't aware. So introduced fish from me, they took it hard because they're not used, they had no exposure to anything like that, therefore no immunity. And this problem had already been rumbling in the pond. So I got quite involved in that back then. And one of the biggest things I noticed all along, this was trying, water disinfection, antibiotics, you name it. One big thing I noticed was the fish never fed properly. So not only was this problem, kind of got it healed at one point, then it opened up again, started again. Anytime a new fish went in, something had rock. And when I eventually got to see them, so weird how they fed. They just they had no interest in food whatsoever. Super, super low energy levels. It would take them so long. And I'm talking midsummer, water heated up, 24, 25 degrees,
sure.
where we're expecting.
Should be on it.
Chuck some food in, bang, they're on it. And they'd eventually eat it, but the process would be so slow and drawn out. So all this combined, and I'd had a lot of other stuff analysed, and nothing was screaming at me. And I'm going, there's something deeper here that all the general koi keeping kit and analysis is not seeing. Sure enough, that's when I kind of got in touch with Anne Telford the first time. She's not working in the industry anymore, unfortunately, but she shed that light, and boom, water testing done, mains and pond, and there was copper like I've not seen in my life. Was it copper or zinc?
Copper is the
nasty
normal one that suppresses a lot of appetite.
I seem to think this was actually zinc. And the reason I say that is the pond was at levels even higher than the tap. The tap was fucking frightening.
Wow.
It was zinc. There was a very prevalent blanket weed treatment at the time that had come onto the market.
Zinc oxide.
That everyone was buzzing for. This shit's amazing. It
it
was
is.
amazing. It was fucking, doing the fish harder than it was the blanket weed.
Yeah.
And again, there's just something else. We don't know what we're putting in. So that's why when I do this analysis as well, I always look for mains water. Unfortunately, it's expensive and you'll pay per test, but I'm looking at mains and pond because I also want to look for any differential. Because when we get the results back, we've got to try and figure out where the problem's potentially coming from. Especially when we've got a differential like that in a pond versus the mains water. And that was then again opened another journey into the world of purification systems and all that not being as it seems. But in a nutshell, got that problem stemmed, which meant the guy couldn't run a trickle because these cartridges that were needed were expensive. So he was just on top up at this point, because like you say, he was flooding water through prior to this and just, you know, bathing them in zinc. It was superb. But yeah, that fixed it all. Completely fixed it all. Feeding behaviour back, got the problem stopped, and then it just went from strength to strength from there. So all these elements, it's so much fun.
Interconnected, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think, you know, ultimately we are dealing with livestock, and there is a degree of fortune or misfortune always.
Yeah.
You know, you could keep koi in quite a poor manner and get away with it for years. You know, that is more luck than judgment. But I think the main thing to take away, if I'm a hobbyist listening to this, is certainly mitigation.
Absolutely.
So control that, control the controllables.
Yeah.
Where you source the fish from.
Just be diligent in that respect. And if you know you've got a problem, please, 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 please do not turn to these so-called fish doctors. The real fish doctors out there will have those letters after. I don't even know what they are for vets, but
Yeah,
you'll see it. Their credentials will be there. Their fees are actually not as scary as you think, not compared to, again, having known what Dr. Def's charge people versus what Bryony charge people. It's not there. There just are some costs you can't get away from for like the analyses and stuff like that. But again, you've got decisions to make. Unfortunately, some tough decisions of, if this collection is priceless to you or whatever it is, pay the costs. You're not going to get away from it. And what I will also find is you can be constantly putting bottles of acroflavin in or whatever it is, hoping you can treat it from the water-bound side. Won't happen. And then you'll just rack up costs anyway, rather than going straight away, I know there's a problem, get some actual diagnosis and the correct drugs, you know, whether that be waterbound, whatever it is. In the meantime of that, you can use the likes of Virkon S for a period of disinfection, but please don't do it as a preventative thing in a healthy pond, because you're more than likely to actually potentially cause issues. And I don't think there's too much more we can really add to that from where we're at, really. But
well, I think that the next step is at some stage getting someone like Bryony involved in one of these chats would be fascinating.
It would. Actually, I've had a chat with her. I think she's up for it. It's just tying it up because she's at the other end of the country. So I'm sure we will. But for now, like I say, you know, on YouTube, you can get this in the description. Of try and find that page where there was the index list of vets. Not all of them will work with fish, but certainly then, as a case, you know, someone like Bryony at London Veterinary Aquatic Service, whatever it is. I've been a bit shit with remembering that, but again, I'll pop that in the YouTube description, and you know, you can reach out to her.
Well, no doubt this topic will rear itself again and again, but hopefully people have, you know, at least we've shed some light on the subject and maybe help people make some more informed decisions.
And also got some great analogies, mate, that I can continue to use.
Less about that. Well, I might have some for my own when you come the end of the season. So,
Look forward to it, mate.
We'll see. So, for now, it's goodbye, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, guys.